There's an assumption sitting quietly in the back of thousands of UK drivers' minds right now, when that used to be true and isn't anymore. And it's the kind of assumption that turns a quick favor for a friend into a 6-point fine and a court appearance. Today we're breaking down exactly what's changed, why it's catching so many people off guard, and what you need to check before you next borrow a car, lend one, or assume your policy covers something it quietly stopped covering a while ago. Let's start with the loophole itself, because it's simpler and more common than most people realize. For years, comprehensive car insurance in this country often came with something called Driving Other Cars Cover, DOC for short, built into the policy almost as standard. It meant that if you had comprehensive insurance on your own car, you were generally also covered, usually on a third-party only basis, to drive someone else's vehicle in an emergency. Borrow a mate's car for an afternoon, hop into a parent's car while yours was in for a service, and most people genuinely believed they were covered because that's how it used to work. Here's the problem. That cover has been quietly disappearing from policies for years now, and most drivers have never actually checked whether their current policy still includes it. Insurers have been stripping it out or restricting it heavily, and a lot of comprehensive policies sold today simply don't include it at all anymore. The word from the industry itself is blunt about this. Drivers need to look closely at their own policy documents, because assuming DOC cover exists because it used to be standard is exactly the trap catching people out. If you drive someone else's car believing you're covered, and you're not, that's not a paperwork technicality, that's the full offense of driving without insurance. The consequences here are worth being completely clear about, because a lot of drivers underestimate them. Get caught driving a car you're not actually insured for, and you're looking at a fine, 6 penalty points, and in more serious cases, a discretionary disqualification decided by the court. If your total points reach 12 within a 3-year window, that's a license revocation, and getting back on the road afterwards means insurers now treat you as a significantly higher risk driver, which follows you into every quote you get for years afterward. This hits younger and newer drivers hardest, and it's worth understanding exactly why. Under 25 drivers are very rarely covered to drive someone else's car without being formally added as a named driver, and that applies whether we're talking about a full annual policy or a short-term temporary one. It's an easy trap precisely because it feels harmless. A student home from university borrows a parent's car to run an errand, or picks up a friend's car because their own is off the road, genuinely believing the old rules about borrowing still apply. They don't. Not automatically. Not anymore. So what actually covers you to drive someone else's vehicle legitimately? There are really only 3 routes. You can take out temporary insurance specifically on the vehicle you want to drive, which covers you properly for that specific period. You can be added as a formal named driver on the other person's policy, or your own policy can explicitly include driving other cars cover, which you need to actually check rather than assume. None of these are complicated to arrange, but all 3 require you to do something proactive rather than simply climbing into the driver's seat and assuming decades-old convention still holds. There's a knock-on effect worth mentioning here too, because it explains why so many families default to adding a young driver as a named driver rather than dealing with DOC assumptions at all. Newer, less experienced drivers pay dramatically more for their own insurance, with drivers who've held a license for under 5 years paying nearly double the overall average for fully comprehensive cover. Being added as a named driver on a parent's policy sounds like the obvious workaround, and it can be, but it comes with its own quiet cost. You don't build your own no-claims bonus while you're a named driver rather than the primary policyholder, which means when you eventually do take out your own policy, you're starting from scratch on the discount that would otherwise have brought your premium down significantly. Now let's talk about the part of this that's actually being enforced automatically, without any officer needing to stop you at all. The system is called continuous insurance enforcement, and it works by constantly comparing 2 databases against each other: the DVLA's record of every registered vehicle keeper, and the motor insurance database showing every currently active policy. If your name comes up as the registered keeper of a vehicle with no matching active insurance record, and you haven't formally declared that vehicle off the road with a SORN, the system flags it automatically. You don't need to have driven anywhere. You don't need to have been stopped. The letter and the fine can land purely because the 2 databases don't match, even if the car's been sitting on your driveway the entire time. This is exactly why a lapsed policy is so much more dangerous than most drivers assume. It's not that you're taking a small risk by driving uninsured for a day or two while you sort out a new quote. It's that the moment your old policy ends and a new one isn't active, that gap is visible to an automated system immediately, comparing records constantly in the background, rather than waiting for a human to notice anything. There's also a newer piece of this puzzle worth flagging, and I want to be upfront that this is a more recent development still being rolled out, rather than something with years of established practice behind it. Insurers and the wider industry have been working toward automatically detecting duplicate insurance, meaning two separate active policies covering the same vehicle at the same time. This can happen innocently, someone switching providers, and the old policy not canceling cleanly, a household accidentally taking out overlapping cover during a change of circumstances. Under the tightening approach being introduced, a detected duplicate can result in one of the policies being voided or terminated by the provider, sometimes the older one, without necessarily leaving the driver with the overlap they assumed they had. If you've recently switched insurers, it's genuinely worth confirming your old policy was properly canceled and isn't still technically live alongside your new one, because assuming the switch simply happened cleanly is not the same as confirming it did. Enforcement on the road itself has also gotten considerably sharper this year, worth knowing regardless of the DOC or duplicate policy angle specifically. Police vehicles increasingly carry automatic number plate recognition technology that checks your insurance status the moment your plate is scanned, often before an officer has even decided to pull you over. The Motor Insurers Bureau estimates roughly 1 million uninsured vehicles are currently on UK roads, and dedicated enforcement operations specifically targeting this figure have expanded significantly, meaning the odds of an uninsured gap actually being caught have risen sharply compared to a few years ago. Vehicle seizure is worth understanding properly too, because it's not just a fine sitting on top of the points. If you're caught driving without insurance, police have the power to seize the vehicle on the spot and remove it from the road entirely, regardless of whether you own it, are borrowing it, or are the named driver on someone else's policy. Getting a seized vehicle back typically means proving valid insurance, and often a valid MOT and license too, on top of paying release and storage fees that climb the longer the car sits impounded. For a car you'd borrowed as a favor, that's an uncomfortable conversation to have with the actual owner, on top of everything else you're now dealing with personally. If you're ever stopped and you genuinely believe you do have valid cover but something doesn't match up, it's worth knowing you're not automatically guilty on the spot. You may be given up to 7 days to produce a valid insurance certificate at a police station. Though it has to be genuinely valid at the time you were originally stopped, you can't simply take out a policy afterward and use that. If your policy was canceled without you being properly notified, that can be a genuine defense, but only if the insurer failed to take reasonable steps to tell you. An honest oversight on your part generally isn't enough to avoid the penalty. It's also worth understanding what happens beyond the immediate fine and points, because the financial fallout of an uninsured gap extends well past the initial penalty. If you're ever involved in a collision while genuinely uninsured, whether that's because of a lapsed policy, a DOC assumption that turned out to be wrong, or a canceled policy you didn't realize had ended, you're personally exposed for the full cost of any damage or injury caused, with no insurer standing behind you to absorb that cost. For anything beyond a minor scrape, that's potentially tens of thousands of pounds coming directly out of your own pocket, rather than being handled through a claims process. This is exactly why the Motor Insurers Bureau exists in the first place, to compensate victims of uninsured drivers, and every payout it makes gets recouped from honest policyholders through slightly inflated premiums across the board. The uninsured driver doesn't escape the cost. They just shift it onto everyone else first, before the courts and the debt collectors eventually catch up with them directly. There's a particular version of this that catches out families more than most, worth flagging on its own. Fronting, where a parent insures a car in their own name and lists an inexperienced young driver as a named driver, while the young driver is actually the main or sole user of the vehicle, is treated as a form of insurance fraud, not a clever workaround. Insurers actively investigate usage patterns when a claim is made, and if it becomes clear the declared main driver wasn't the one genuinely using the car day to day, the policy can be voided entirely, retroactively, leaving whoever was driving at the time of any incident with no cover at all, on top of a fraud mark against the family's name that makes future insurance considerably harder and more expensive to obtain. It's an understandable instinct, wanting to protect a new driver from brutal premiums, But the actual solution is being honest about who the main driver is and shopping around properly, not disguising the arrangement on paper. So let's bring this together into something you can actually act on today, rather than just something to feel uneasy about. Check your own policy document specifically for driving other cars cover. Don't assume it's there because it used to be standard years ago. Because for a lot of comprehensive policies now, it simply isn't. If you're under 25, assume you have no cover to drive someone else's car unless you've been formally added as a named driver, full stop. If you're switching insurance providers, actively confirm your old policy has been properly canceled, rather than assuming the process closed it out cleanly on its own. If you've got a vehicle sitting unused on your driveway with no current insurance, either get it properly covered or declare it SORN, because the automatic database comparison behind continuous insurance enforcement doesn't care whether the car's actually been driven anywhere. And if you're insuring a young driver in the family, make sure the person named as the main driver on the policy is genuinely who's using the car most, because the short-term saving from fronting isn't worth the total loss of cover if it's ever investigated. None of this is designed to make borrowing a car feel like a legal minefield every single time. Most of these situations genuinely are simple to sort out properly. A quick temporary policy, a 5-minute call to be added as a named driver, an email confirming a cancellation actually went through. What's changed is that the old, looser assumptions that used to quietly cover the gaps no longer reliably do, and the systems now checking for those gaps run automatically in the background, rather than waiting for a human to happen to notice. If this helped you spot a gap in your own cover you genuinely hadn't considered, hit subscribe, because insurance enforcement keeps tightening, and I'll keep breaking down exactly what it means for your wallet and your license. Whether it's the DOC loophole quietly disappearing from more policies each year, duplicate cover detection catching switches that didn't close out cleanly, or ANPR simply getting better at spotting the gap in real time, the direction is consistent across all of it. Less relying on drivers to self-report, more automatic checking happening in the background. Stay safe out there, and I'll see you in the next one.